You read this Washington Post report that hit on Friday, the headline of which is, hold on, Hegseth order on first Caribbean boat strike. Officials say, kill them all.
Yeah.
The subhead, as two men clung to a stricken, burning ship targeted by SEAL Team 6, the Joint Special Operations Commander followed the Defense Secretary's order to leave no survivors. Now we have the New York Times weighing in, saying basically that this was wrong, that there was one order by Pete Hegseth. It was before the mission and said, take out these boats. And there was no order saying kill them all.
Right.
But he wanted these boats destroyed. And that there was no subsequent communication between Pete Hegseth and the admiral who was on scene making the calls saying, kill those survivors who were clinging for life to this partially destroyed boat. That is not what happened, according to 5 sources in the New York Times. We'll see what the Washington Post does. But you, before you even knew about the New York Times reporting, were saying there are enough holes in that WAPO report to drive a truck through. I do not trust this, and I actually don't think any war crime has been stated. Why?
So there's just so much speculation that's going on. So we don't know. It was 2 anonymous sources who were reporting, the quote from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. And we don't know for sure. Well, first of all, they're anonymous reports, anonymous sources. So there is that. But even the quote from the story, it's not clear whether this was a direct quote from, Pete Hegseth saying, kill everybody, the way that it's worded in the Washington Post story, or whether the anonymous sources are basically paraphrasing what Secretary of War told to, whoever the audience was. And so that was the first element that, that I'm concerned about. And then even if, let's say, it was directly before the mission and the Secretary of War directs, whatever the commander is involved to kill everybody, that still isn't necessarily in order to take no prisoners, right? And so we are trained that if somebody is out of the fight due to sickness, illness, injury, or detention, in this case, shipwreck, that we don't continue the attack. And so if troops are given an order to kill everybody, you can reasonably interpret that to be kill all the enemy, attack the enemy. But at the same time, if you do end up encountering someone who is out of the fight, in this case due to shipwreck, then you don't attack them.
Exactly. So what the New York Times is reporting today, it hit last night, is that, again, 5 U.S. officials who spoke separately on the condition of anonymity said Mr. Hegseth, ahead of the September 2nd attack, ordered a strike that would kill the people on board the boat and destroy the vessel and its purported cargo of drugs, which would be a standard order.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't order these boats destroyed and not expect the people on board are going to die. You just take them out, take out the boat, take out the drug cargo on board. And that was it.
Exactly.
Not what the Washington Post reported, which was as these 2 survivors are clinging there, Pete Hegseth called up and said, take them out.
Right.
That's what the Washington Post went with. It's what NPR is going with still today, even in the wake of late night's New York Times drop.
Yeah, and it's just completely speculative. And, I understand the need to rely on anonymous sources at times when we're reporting, stories, especially when we're dealing with the government. But we still need to assess, we need to engage in a bit of media literacy and say, okay, well, these anonymous sources are saying that Pete Hegseth said this. And there's just so much, ambiguity there, which, ambiguity is fine. We're going to have that in reporting, but then to take that and run with it and essentially accuse the sitting Secretary of War of being a war criminal based on, this basically double hearsay that's being reported from anonymous sources is just, it doesn't make any rational sense.
Well, and on top of everything, so now you tell me, let's deal with what we believe is the reality here. Because WAPO suggested that Hegseth gave a spoken order, saying, kill them all, kill everyone who is still in that water. Now we believe that's not true, that the Washington Post had that wrong. So let's deal with what we believe actually happened. Pete gave the okay for the mission take out the boat, strike it, everybody on board is going to die, and take out the cargo. Then they dropped their first strike.
Right.
And the boat was, according to the administration's critics, they say it was destroyed. Excuse me, it was destroyed. And you have these two clinging to life. And the rules of law prohibit you from striking them. Now let's talk about the admiral, because the admiral, this guy Mitch, forgive me, can't find his last name in front of me. He did say, Bradley, let's have a second strike.
Right.
He is the one who said, we need a second strike. But that too is not a war crime, because you point out in your piece the difference between destroying a boat and damaging a boat.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So assuming that the boat itself originally is a military objective. So by definition, in the law of armed conflict, this is something that's by its nature, location, purpose, or use, in this case, purpose, makes an effective contribution to military action such that, capturing it or destroying it gives a definite military advantage, concrete direct military advantage under the circumstances ruling at the time. So that's the standard. That's what we apply in practice. That's what we're trained on. And so the boats, to begin with, assuming that law of armed conflict applies, and there's a lot of discussion about whether it should or shouldn't, and that's something we could get into. But for purposes of the operators who are involved in this strike, they are applying the law of armed conflict because they're told that they're in an armed conflict. So, this boat originally qualifies then as a military objective by definition that I just suggested, and it will no longer be a military objective if it is completely destroyed, right? So if under the circumstances no longer by its use makes an effective contribution. And even with the facts that the Washington Post it reports in that initial story, there's an indication to me, at least when I read this, that the commander involved must have assessed that it's still qualified, to use the legal term, still qualified as a military objective, because he suggested that it could still radio for assistance, and another boat could come and capture, regain control of the cargo, and then continue mission. Almost said Charlie Mike, because that's what we call it in the military. Continue mission. And so if that's the case, then it's my impression from reading that is that the commander must have assessed that this boat still qualifies as a military objective such that it can still be attacked, which would also mean, incidentally, that the personnel that are on board are not shipwrecked, because, and if they were shipwrecked, let's call them hors de combat, so out of the fight due to shipwreck. So we should not attack them in that case. But if the vessel that they're on still qualifies as a military objective, then they're not, but they're by definition, they're not shipwrecked. And, the commander could order subsequent strikes to finish the mission, to complete the mission, to ensure that the boat is no longer serviceable, that no longer is a military objective.
So if the boat is not destroyed and the mission is to destroy it, and you have two survivors who are floating on the boat or holding onto the boat in the water, it's fair game. They're going to go if the mission is take out that boat.
That's right. So this is a difference between whether the boat was disabled or destroyed. And so if it's destroyed, we can think of, pieces of boat floating around in the water, and maybe survivors with a life vest on or clinging to it or whatever. Like, that's a destroyed boat. And if that's the case, then there would be no reason to reattack it. But if the boat is disabled, and again, by the initial report from the Washington Post, it's what it sounds to me like the commander involved assessed that the boat was disabled rather than destroyed, then it still qualifies then by legal definition, by the law of armed conflict, as a military objective, such that it can be it can be attacked until
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The mission is destroy it.
Yeah.
You've only disabled it,
Right.
so you need a second strike to destroy it. That's what this Admiral Bradley saw and did. And those two guys who survived the initial blast were taken down in the second strike. And now, not only did we have the suggestion that it's possible the two survivors might have been able to coordinate with other narco-terrorists, we actually, in the New York Times report, have, this is on the record now, one of the officials that spoke to the Times is quoted as saying the U.S. military intercepted radio communications from one of the survivors to what the official said were narco traffickers.
Right.
I mean, now that's as clear cut as it comes. Any military commander would order those guys taken out.
Absolutely, because at that point, if that's the intelligence that they have, at that point, it absolutely still does qualify. Because again, by definition, an object that by its use makes an effective contribution to military action. And so, it was kind of implied by the way that the Washington Post reported it that, the commander believed that they could radio for assistance and have someone come and get the cargo and continue with the mission. But with with going on record now, establishing on the record that yes, there was in fact a radio transmission that was intercepted, then that basically supports the conclusion that that's exactly what the commander believed at the time, and the commander ordered subsequent strikes to destroy the boat because it wasn't destroyed to begin with.
This is so amazing to me. This all makes perfect sense. It's a left-wing Trump-hating narrative that we have these military commanders who are just these rogue agents who have thrown caution to the wind, who are just out there for bloodlust, trying to take down anybody that they see in the seas, as opposed to rational, thoughtful, considered leaders who understand the rules of military combat a lot better than the Washington Post. Yeah. Or some armchair pundits who want to jump all over them. And it also seemed clear in the way the military was very careful in its wording about this. You had Trump saying, Hegseth told me he did not give that second order, that he did not give a verbal command to kill all the people. And they're still denying that. And then Hegseth sent out a tweet saying, I stand behind Admiral Bradley. He's done nothing wrong, which seemed to be a way of saying, here's the guy who gave the order, but he did nothing wrong. It was a way of sort of clarifying it wasn't me, and now we know it wasn't him. But we also want to find out whether Admiral Bradley did anything wrong, and the answer is no. He had a partially destroyed ship from which, according to this one official to the Times, the radio comms were still possible, and one of the survivors was using them to call in backup. Ever read the label on a typical bag of chips? It's often a science experiment of seed oils, MSG, artificial dyes, and mystery ingredients. Masa is part of the growing movement to bring back real food. Masa chips contain just 3 ingredients: organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. Not only do these chips avoid the bad stuff, they also taste delicious too. Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Masa, you feel satisfied, light, and energetic with no crash and no bloat. And if you love Masa, then you will love Vandy Crisps. Vandy, which is Masa's sister company, makes the most delicious 3-ingredient potato chips too. Ready to give Masa or Vandy a try? Use code MK for 25% off your first order at masachips.com or vandycrisps.com, or simply click the link in the video description or scan the QR code to claim this delicious offer. Don't feel like ordering online? Masa and Vandy are now available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. Stop by and pick a couple of bags up before they're all gone. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.